All right. This is that moment of truth where we're waiting for everything to go live. Hello, everybody. Once we see you here, YouTube, it looks like you're coming to life here. We got a YouTube. We got a YouTube alive. Good morning, YouTube. You guys know me. I have to see it just to make sure everything's up and atom the way it's supposed to be. Then we officially begin. And there is Rockfin. And Twitter always comes in first. Twitter's the quickest. And then it's usually a battle for second. Today it was YouTube. In the past, it's been Rockfin. You know the drill. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Hello to everyone in the future, Australia, New Zealand. If you woke up early to catch the show, that's freaking awesome. And of course, to everyone checking out the podcast later, hope you are having a wonderful day. Hope you are having fun errands, whatever it is you're up to. This is Get Your News On with Ron, and this is the interview show for the week. And I am super excited about my guest. We usually try to check in with her once a year and get the scoop on everything that's going on with her. She is a doctor. She is a prominent member of the Green Party, and she is a presidential candidate for the Green Party. Please welcome. Oh, and you know what? I do not like to forget this about her biography because this is very important, especially for Get Your News On with Ron purposes. She is a musician. So please welcome back to the show, the one and only Jill Stein. Jill, how are you?
Great. Good to be with you, Ron.
Good to see you. Happy New Year. And hope all's going well. So let's jump right into things because we have an awful lot to talk about today. And I know one of the things that you specifically really wanted to bring up was the FEC battle that you're still amidst of. So we can go ahead and start there. So I guess to begin, kind of give everyone a little bit of a refresher because this kind of goes back to 2016. So give everyone a refresher of what's been going on there.
Great. And to just like put this in context, I want to just start by saying that we are facing existential crisis on steroids, a climate that is, in collapse right now and accelerating, crushing inequality, endless war that's about to go even much worse, and with nuclear risks and all that.
Did you see the list of topics I wrote out ahead of time? Did you see the list I prepared for you?
I think we are maybe we're on the same page here, or we're thinking in the same brain. But I think most people are there right now. Because who's not experiencing this state of emergency that we're in? And war, climate, crushing inequality, and then this kind of chaos of public health, the COVID chaos that we're in right now, all of which reflect that we are in a full-fledged democracy meltdown and crisis. And to me, this it just drives home again why we need more than two political parties sponsored by the bankers and the billionaires and the big oil and war profiteers who benefit from this state of crisis. We got two parties that are funded by the profiteers, and they don't change course. And this is not like just the last decade. This has been going on as long as I've been on the planet. And there was a big effort way back in the 60s and the 70s to reform the supposedly progressive party that is the Democrats. There was a thing called the realignment movement, which was going to bring together labor and the civil rights movement, which were giants back in that day, and they were going to reform the party. And of course, that floundered on the on the rocky shores of the Vietnam War, because both parties are creatures of the war industry and have been, as Dwight Eisenhower warned us way back then, at the end of the Second World War.
Was it an anti-war movement? I'm not super familiar with
it. Was not. And that was the thing. It divided over the war. And, Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, took a very principled stand against the war because they were the fodder for that war. It was above all people of color that were being sent to die in Vietnam, and lots of others as well, but it was, an especially outrageous burden for the communities of color. So they were ready to take a stand, and organized labor, for the most part, was not. And so the whole movement to, quote, reform the Democratic Party really fell apart, as long as it's been happening. And with each generation, there's a new illusion and a new sheepdog to kind of keep hope alive that things are going to change. But if you actually look at what's happened, we have only become more of an oligarchy. Money and power have concentrated more in the hands of fewer and fewer. It was certainly, it was evident in the Reagan administration. Now, he wasn't a Democrat, but this is a bipartisan problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
you
like
go back to Jimmy Carter, even, for the war on unions. You were going to say?
Well, no, I was just going to say the way I like to frame it is I have only experienced in my entire lifetime Reagan or worse than Reagan as a president. I mean, that's all we've had.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you were around to see it, there was the Clinton outrages, in the 90s. And it's just been one assault after another. And, the system relies on people not knowing, and kind of organizing in the moment and being kind of oblivious to the actual track record here. And many of us, myself included, I'm oblivious to what took place before I was around, and there are loads of lessons there too, but to the extent you can glimpse them, they're pretty much the same, that progressives and everyday, and I don't mean just progressives, I mean populists, people who are not on the payroll or are not themselves, in the top 5 and 10%, and especially the top 1, are we are systematically thrown under the bus. And that's the way it works. And you're not supposed to know that that's the way it works. You're supposed to think the struggle is just in the moment. But that's really, and you can go back to the writing of the Constitution and see, what was really hardwired into our fledgling, so-called democracy. There were definitely some improvements that were being made there, but lots of preservation of the slave state and the oligarchy and kind of the makings of corporate capitalism. I mean, there was capitalism for sure, but it became much more corporate as time went on, and decisions that got made. It's been a mixed bag.
Oh, totally. I mean, people try to make it out like the Constitution is some omnipotent document, and it isn't. It was written by a particular group of people. The way I like to frame it is that they wrote the Declaration of Independence at a party, and then they wrote the Constitution the next day when they sobered up and realized they like all the power they have.
Yeah, exactly. And we struggle with all that, and it is it's a horrific legacy. But getting to sort of the subject here that we're starting off with, at any rate, is that in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, first they laugh at you, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And in 2016, we couldn't be ignored. And we couldn't, they couldn't laugh at us because we had a lot to say. And in fact, our agenda of 2016 has really been embraced, at least superficially, from the Green New Deal to Medicare for All, to free public higher education, the abolition of student debt, reparations for slavery.
Can I ask you a quick question about that really quick? Because this actually
Sure.
wasn't on my list, but I feel like it is very important. How does that make you feel on a personal level when you were bringing up ending student debt in 2016? And of course, there were a lot of people on board. I mean, I was one of them. But still, even on a larger scale, there were people laughing at the idea. I mean, John Oliver even did a segment on, we can't possibly do that. Now everybody realizes, or at least on a much more mass level, I would argue, everybody realizes that, yes, we can, to quote Barack Obama, we most certainly can eliminate student loan debt. do you have a little bit of an "I told you so" thing going on? Because it's like you were one of the only people in the political realm, certainly the only presidential candidate by far, who was saying that.
I didn't get into this thinking that it was going to be, sweetness and light. I got into this, after decades of political struggle. I kind of went kicking and screaming into any political party whatsoever. I'd spent most of my life as an activist, fighting on the issues and in the trenches, and knew that the system was extremely corrupt. And if you dare to challenge it, get ready to be whacked, So I knew I would be whacked, and I wasn't expecting thank you notes here, or expecting anybody to blow kisses. I wasn't surprised at all by the resistance. In fact, in many ways, I'm honored that we got the resistance that we did, because it does fit right into Gandhi's paradigm, and it's a mark of success. If you get to where they start fighting back, you've really accomplished something, and you've really shaken the tree. And I'm really glad we've done that. I'm incredibly gratified that our agenda has been adopted. And I never expected to be thanked for any of that. And that agenda itself was the product of many people's work, and lots of Greens had helped evolve that. Sure. And Ralph Nader, of course, had launched Medicare for All as a national issue back in 2000. But all the other issues really were launched by us into the national dialogue, actually starting in 2012 in my first presidential campaign. And they were taken very seriously, and more seriously in 2016 because of the way things were falling apart within the Democratic Party and the Sanders insurgency. And, so that made us extremely threatening. Why? Because to have an option outside of the Democratic Party empowers progressive Democrats and forces the party to take them seriously, because then everyday people have somewhere else they can go. And I think that is why we have been so viciously, repressed and suppressed and vilified and ridiculed since 2016, because the Democratic Party is falling apart, and because our economy is falling apart, because our climate is falling apart, because international, relations are falling apart, are in a very dangerous place. So in many ways, the days are numbered for empire. It is crashing and burning before our very eyes. And, it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic how the empire continues to really humiliate itself right now. It has succeeded in dividing NATO and really creating a kind of bluff situation in Ukraine. We don't have to go into that a whole lot right now.
Let's
but
not get too far ahead.
Right.
Yeah, so FEC first, and then
okay. So suffice it to say, the Greens and other progressives, we are a very inconvenient truth, and we really call out our democracy to behave like a democracy, and it's not. It's absolutely not. And the Democrats, for all their, virtue signaling around freedom to vote and, their HR 1, which was all about voting rights. Voting rights as long as you're a good, loyal
I don't know
Democratic
how you saw my question
constituency.
list ahead of time. I don't know. It's right here. I wrote it in pen. I don't know how. You must have X-ray vision or something.
I have insiders that sent me your agenda. All right, so we'll save that one for later too. But the point being, our message is not appreciated, our existence is not appreciated. But this is what authoritarian regimes do all the time. They suppress political opposition. So this happens in a lot of routine ways, like that if you are not part of the corporate political oligarchy, it's very hard to get on the ballot. And needless to say, the press, wipes you out. You don't exist in the mainstream press, and you have to spend a huge amount of money to overcome obstructive ballot laws that require you to collect tens of thousands of signatures in many states and at least thousands in just about all. I mean, there are one or two exceptions, maybe Vermont, but most states have this enormous ballot requirement. And if you're not being funded by bankers and billionaires and fossil fuel barons and the likes, and war profiteers, you don't have that money. So it's a very convenient way to suppress political opposition. So all of that is like totally routine. But what got different, I think, and reflects that our 2016 effort got a little bit too much momentum, for the comfort of the political authoritarians, is that they came after me big time in Russiagate and really tried to vilify me as a, what did Hillary Clinton say? I'm a Russian asset.
You're a Russian asset, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Russian asset, me and Tulsi Gabbard. And, Bernie Sanders was implicated in his way too. But, I thought that was really quite something to be noticed at that level.
That's a very diplomatic way to put it. That's quite something.
But what that meant was that I had to spend 3 years fighting the Senate Intelligence Committee, which launched a formal investigation not only of me, but also of the recount, which they deemed kind of the creation of Russian foreigners. They claimed had funded the recount, which is absolutely garbage. There was never any evidence to that effect. Never. And, it was just part of trying to link us into a scheme because I had given them, a launching pad by going to basically a peace conference, a media conference in Moscow in 2015, where I promoted our agenda and jumped at the chance to have a national voice with international media, everybody from the BBC to the Canadian broadcasting system to China and India and, and European and so on. I mean,
someone was seated at your table
for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or something, but there was no translator. I really wanted to give him my elevator speech about why we needed a global Green New Deal and why we needed to end nuclear weapons and a peace offensive in the Middle East, and why he was following in the disastrous U.S. footsteps by conducting a bombing campaign in Syria. So I was all for the peace offensive in the Middle East, and I told that to everybody I had a chance to give my elevator speech to, and the main reason I went is because I had a place in the program. All of this was totally public. I raised public money in order to go there, making sure I did not accept a penny from, foreigners in order to do this, and it was all above board, all very public, and somehow
none of the cable networks could figure that out.
Yeah,
somehow like all the cable news networks with all their resources couldn't just follow the trail there. They couldn't figure that one out
somehow. Yeah, exactly. So they came after me for that, and I fought that for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years they finally published in their 5th report that there was nothing. And they published details of my campaign, which I had spent the prior 3 years spoon feeding them all this information and all this evidence and data, spending a huge amount of money in order to hire the lawyers, in order to participate in this investigation. And at the end, they basically said, oops, nothing there. Thank you very much for having cooperated. And that was sort of the sum of what they concluded. But of course, that wasn't covered in the media. They just used this as an opportunity to smear me. And I felt obliged to really follow the details of Russiagate so that I could debunk the smears as they came one after another. That's most of what my time and energy was spent doing, in addition to the recount, which actually did have very important successes, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, where we did succeed in pushing Pennsylvania to get rid of its paperless voting machines and really to raise the bar. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, but it was a very important step, and it had national implications. But aside from that work, most of what I did for the next 3 years was debunk Russiagate and fight back so that the rumor mill couldn't take on a life of its own, which is how they go after you. They try to criminalize you by instigating myths and rumors and then creating so much public momentum that then they can get away with, locking you up. And, Julian Assange is sort of the classic case of that. And I was very aware of that. And I did not want to just let them get away with murder. And so that's what I did for 3 years. And then within about 2 weeks of the conclusion of that investigation, I got a letter from the FEC saying that I had to pay them $175,000 for public funding that was spent to get on the ballot, which is what the public funding was supposed to be for. And that's what we used it for in 2012. And we basically applied our experience of 2012 to 2016. So suffice it to say, I was totally blindsided by this. As a candidate, one usually does not follow the details of your FEC, of your FEC dynamics. Candidates are, entirely unaware of that. So at that point, because we really no longer had a campaign, this is 5 years after the fact. 5 years later, I'm getting this bill, basically, this demand that I pay $175,000.
And the money was because you were on the ballot. That's like...
Well, we got money. You have to qualify for matching funds, and you qualify by raising donations that are under $200, and you have to raise a certain amount in each state, and you submit that, and then you qualify for a certain amount of money. So we used a lot of that money. I mean, practically all of that money to get on the ballot, which is your main expense. If you are an independent candidate, you spend down most of your resources just trying to get past the barred gates to participate in the process and give Americans the choices that we're supposed to have in a democracy. Mm-hmm. So that's where the money went. And the FEC was basically applying some very obscure rules that I was entirely unaware of. But, it took me like a year. I dropped everything at that point. And I just said, okay, I'm going to figure out what's going on here because I don't have resources to hire an attorney now and figure this out. And I don't have a campaign apparatus to raise the money either. This is like 5 years after the campaign. Who's going to fund that, So I became, a research junkie on FEC compliance and exactly what happened when. And, we began to get the resources that, in little bits that we could hire a first lawyer. And then eventually we have a second attorney as well, Harry Kresge, who's been an attorney for political independence going way back and has been a wonderful resource. He was joined by Oliver Hall, who I also have to give big props to, with the Center for Competitive Democracy, because he's the go-to guy for political independence and third parties who want to have a competitive democracy, so that's what his group is about. And he has joined in a pro bono capacity, which has been just a total lifesaver. So this is what I've done for the last, going on 2 years now. All I do is fight this battle with the FEC pushback. We participated in a conciliation process, which had to be confidential, so I couldn't say anything about it publicly for the first year plus. And then when our conciliation succeeded in some ways, but basically failed on the big stuff, we are going to court and we are waiting for our case to be heard. We're about to file a big brief. So I've had to spend so much time digging into FEC rules and history and all the minutia of who sent what memo to whom when, and how the money was spent and all the details of it, which basically boils down to that there are obscure and contradictory rules that the FEC uses, which really tilt the playing field against grassroots players.
Mm-hmm.
And when the big players get into trouble with the FEC, and that often happens too, because the rules are so complicated, even they can't follow them with their teams of corporate lawyers, and they don't take public money anymore.
Right.
In large measure for that very reason. Everybody from John Andrews, you probably don't remember him, John Anderson, who was this independent back in like the 60s, who was a very progressive independent. I mean, a guy of just impeccable integrity. Everybody's always getting into trouble with the FEC, some of it for good reason and a lot of it not for good reason. But the FEC is a bipartisan organization, and it basically is the first and last line of defense for the two corporate parties. And it provides the appearance of safeguarding the integrity of elections. But over the years, our elections have changed, and now most of the money is coming in. It's dark money, it's unaccountable super PAC money, and a lot of it is also party money. The political parties can contribute huge amounts, and they also raise it.
Right.
Let me just make one last point, which is that us ordinary mortals follow the rules. Everyday people can contribute no more than, I think it's now up to $2,900 in an election cycle, which is extremely high. But if you are a big donor through the DNC or the RNC, you can contribute not $2,900, you can contribute $600,000 in a single check. So this is through like the Victory Fund. So there've been all kinds of legal schemes, or I should say legal end runs around reasonable campaign limits. There's just all kinds of devious dealings now that you need a whole team of corporate lawyers in order to do. And that's what the Democrats and Republicans do as a rule. And us little guys never do that, yet we are subject to all these incredible rules, and we get nitpicked all the time. And
it's just such a scam. Like it's just so all this stuff that you were mentioning, where they have all this corporate money, this dark money, this party money, that's all just fine. But actual grassroots efforts to try to compete with this, that's nitpicked. Where 5 years after an election, hey, you got $175,000 bill you need to take care of. Yeah. I mean, it's just like this. You could not write this as a dystopian novel. Like you couldn't do it. It's just too absurd at this point.
And this is, I'm fighting this for a lot of reasons. It's like, it's a pretty ruinous thing to have a $175,000 bill thrown at you. Like, I'm a doctor, so I won't lose my house, but most grassroots candidates would. So what does this do to the future of grassroots politics? It's like the crucifixion in the square. It says, you dare to challenge us? Well, get ready for what's going to happen to you. And it's an assault, really, I think, on public financing and independent politics and ballot access, which really depends on having the public money in order to make it over these hurdles. So to my mind, this is like textbook political repression. It is just hardwired into the rules of the game. They don't have to drag it out just for you. It's like the way the rules are written, they're so complicated and they're so obscure that you're going to get skewered on them. And if you don't have a big fundraising machine that's ready to go for you, which is what the big candidates do if they get caught on the FEC rules, they just raise it, easily through their big money machines and their big donors. So, we're fighting this. And if people want to help fight for the future of independent politics, go to jillstein.net and you'll find the story is there. And you can help push back against this political repression against independent politics, which is more important than ever. And if you want to segue here, Ron, you can do that, because to my mind, that's the real rub, is that it's not just that independent candidates are getting big fines. It's that our future is going up in flames before our very eyes right now. And the fight against that is being silenced because independent politics is being shut down.
Right. So based on everything we've talked about so far, which there is a lot of ground, and it is very discouraging from the perspective of we want an alternative to the duopoly, to the, I like to call them Wall Street approved Team D and Wall Street approved Team R. What are some steps that can be taken, and not just by the Greens, but by any third party movement, to make third parties more viable?
Join one, join one. And, if you have concerns about what it means in certain votes, you could still vote however you want. But it's really important to build the movement for independent politics, because corporate politics is only becoming more and more corporate, and in fact, if you look at where the big money is coming from, it's mostly coming from Democrats now. It's not only small donors, it's big donors. And by the way, small donors are not saving the day. There's a lot of lip service given to small donors. And of course, they are, critically important. We should have a publicly funded system of elections. We should not be dependent on, on money and big money and sources of money. There should be an even playing field. And, there are legitimate ways to require candidates to qualify, but you shouldn't qualify based on, how fat your Rolodex is with lobbyists and corporate contributors. So it is the Democrats right now who are leading in the money game. Small donors accounted for 22% in 2020. 22%, okay, that means 78% was the big donors. And those big donors are donating in bigger quantities than ever.
Well, and when you give that number, does that mean like completely total out of the entire primary and everything? Like, is that where that number
It's throughout the election cycle? Yes, those numbers are from Open Secrets.
So chances are, I guess the reason I ask that is chances are the only reason it is even that high is because of Bernie Sanders. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I would think. And that was up from 2016, where it was more like 16%, I want to say, as opposed to 22%. So it did increase. That's good. But the big donors are donating in huge quantities, and that's growing much faster than the small donors are growing. And in fact, the total amount of money flooding our political process doubled between 2016 and 2020. So it's on the rise. It is accelerating, and the corruption goes with it. As John McCain himself used to say, where there's a lot of money sloshing around, there is going to be a lot of corruption that goes with it. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, he said it with jubilance, though. He was happy about it. He was stoked. He's just like, there's a lot of corruption, and I can't. I'm getting my taste.
Yes, exactly. But he was actually among his colleagues. He was one of the more principled. Not that he didn't wallow in a lot of it himself, but yeah. It's the numbers are going up. The parties are more and more corrupt. And look who's now the head of the DNC. Jamie Harrison, I think his name is, who was their failed candidate from South Carolina for Senate, who broke records in his fundraising and still lost because, the Democrats are such hypocrites that they can throw all this corporate money into their races and compromise their agenda all the more for being awash in that corporate money, and they still can't win, and the Abigail Spanbergers who say, never mention the word socialism again, who barely won her race, who is an example, as Jamie Harrison is, of the kinds of candidates. Harrison is was a corporate lobbyist for fossil fuel and tobacco and the usual suspects. That's who's now heading the DNC. The DNC, which, by the way, will not recognize the the grassroots Democratic parties that are trying to reform their state parties. So Nevada had a Democratic election and was taken over by their grassroots progressives, and the DNC did an end run around them. They won't recognize them. They won't share their, they have found ways to deprive them of their money and their database. So, the Democrats who believe so, heartfully in voting rights, they won't even respect the votes in their own state parties, and they take them over. Instead, they created a PAC to serve as the state party, so that's the paradigm,
Well,
so
and that's just one example of when they have shown their entire ass. I think another example in Buffalo, where they hijacked the mayor. They just, whenever they try to throw that blue no matter who thing at their voters, they can never do that again. They never could have at the first, but you know what I mean? Like now it is just like so blatant, where it's like, how can you guys say that when you just screwed over a mayoral candidate in Buffalo? Like so blatantly, where that guy
so
did
blatantly.
the write-in thing. It's just so. I want to get a little bit into the Green Party specifically too, because first of all, I think we gotta inject a little bit of positivity here, and y'all have seen some victories recently. In the past election cycle, that there were some decent local victories throughout the country by Greens. Are there any that, first of all, are there any you want to highlight? And also, are there any larger kind of initiatives the Green Party is working on? I know that y'all have done a lot for ranked choice voting, which I appreciate a lot, but are there some other things you would like to kind of emphasize and highlight as well?
First, I want to just underscore what you just said about ranked choice voting, which also answers your first question about what can we do to open up the democratic process. Insist on ranked choice voting, really push it. It's outrageous that ranked choice voting is not a part of the Democrats' voting rights agenda. We should have a right to vote, but not a right to choose who we vote for. That's classic political machine language. And anybody who has a shred of a belief that the Democratic Party is reformable or can be rehabilitated, you should be pushing for ranked choice voting, which, by the way, hugely expands the power of progressives and populists within the Democratic Party, because the minute progressives have somewhere else to go and you're not intimidated by fears about the spoiler effect, vote splitting, whatever you want to call it, the minute that obsession goes away, then progressives become very powerful within the Democratic Party. But without that, you are absolutely powerless, and forget it for the future of progressives within the Democratic Party. So if you even want to save the Democratic Party, put ranked choice voting, insist that ranked choice voting become a part of the agenda, and force the vote that's going to be a principal, open and small d Democratic vote. So that would be critical in terms of like looking at where the Greens are right now in this fight. I really want to send people right now to a website and a campaign that I am extremely excited about. Maybe one of the most important campaigns I think the Greens have ever run. And this is the campaign of Matthew Hoh, that's spelled H-O-H, who's running for Senate in North Carolina. He's running for an open seat. There are 5 candidates, including Libertarian and an independent, as well as a Green. Matthew Hoh, the name may ring a bell because he is the one former State Department official who actually had a post in Afghanistan in, I think it was 2010, when Obama was doing his surge. And Matt Hoh was a 3 tour of duty Marine who had risen up to the rank, I think, of captain and then to a State Department appointment. And so he had a glorious future if he could just kind of keep his mouth shut about what he was seeing in Afghanistan and his 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is no shrinking violet. This is not someone who, talks the talk without walking the walk. This is someone who just routinely put his life on the line for his, attachment to his community and his country, and did it in a very honorable way, and didn't like what he saw. And when he saw that Obama was surging the troops, he wrote a letter resigning. He made a very public resignation, and at that point became an ardent anti-war activist, member of Veterans for Peace and many other very principled foreign policy groups, where he now holds some, position in one of these progressive watchdog groups. And I had heard about him at the time that he quit, and I thought, wow, who's doing that? And then hadn't heard anything of him for quite some time. And then at the time that the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan recently, he and another awesome vet, Danny Shurjan, I think, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but the two of them were featured. And Matthew was featured on Democracy Now!, on Aaron Mate, on Matt Taibbi and Katie Helper. He's a really eloquent spokesperson. He is, a true veteran who lives the struggle of veterans and does a lot now to help veterans survive with what he describes as blood on our hands, that won't wash off. And, I just find his words are so compelling, because that blood is on all of our hands, and we all have to stop the bleeding, and that bleeding is only accelerating over the years as we, conduct, I think it's 85 operations now, so-called anti-terror operations around the world, 800 bases. We're talking about Russia, daring to defend its borders. Well, what did we do when Russia had missiles in Cuba? We went ballistic, and we were ready to go to nuclear war because Russia was in Cuba. What would we be doing if Russia had its troops and its weapons encroaching on our border in Mexico? We would go ballistic. So this is that in reverse. Anyhow, Matthew speaks to all of this. He has lived this. He has bled for it. He knows what he's talking about. A person of courage like that really needs to be in the Senate. And I really urge people to go to his website, which is Matthew Ho, and that's 2 T's in the Matthew Ho for Senate.org. And I urge you to get involved early and often. And let's make this, the flagship campaign for people of principle to break the stranglehold of oligarchy on our democracy, our lives, our future. This is really perfect.
So let's dovetail to Russia-Ukraine for just a minute, because it's come up naturally a few times. Do you think that the Russia hysteria over the past 5 years has kind of helped sell this whole thing over in Russia-Ukraine, where we are giving them all of these weapons, we are beating the drums for war yet again? Russia's saying, we don't want to invade, we just don't want missiles pointed at us. Even Ukraine's kind of just like, yeah, we don't want to fight anything, but the U.S. is still like, we gotta down, we want money.
Yeah, totally. Ukraine is not only saying, stop pouring gasoline on this, there's no fire, you have Germany, who's refusing to send weapons. You have the Czech Republic, and I forget, another state as well, another one of those border nations, is also refusing to send troops. So, this is like the US and the UK tails wagging the dogs, because because the rulers of both of those countries are in a lot of hot water right now, and are, need to look good for whatever reason, but they're not looking good, and this is basically split NATO. But there's nothing new here. And I would urge people to go to a consortium GetYourNewsOnWithRon.org, which is a really great website,
Yeah,
and they have a
did
number
great
of
work.
unbelievable foreign policy experts who are not new kids on the block here. And there's an article there today by, I forget his name, the guy who used to be the United Nations weapons inspector. Before that was a high-ranking Marine for many years. A guy of really just impeccable qualifications, who basically said that what we've done here is allowed Russia to do a checkmate. That Russia really has the has a number of tools in their hands right now because NATO's been split. In many ways, they've kind of called our bluff. We've agreed to send 8,000 troops, not to Ukraine, but to the surrounding countries. We've done a number of things that don't look good, and it doesn't reflect well on the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Surprise, surprise, as if Anthony Blinken, had just mostly bluster and false virtue signaling going on from him. But this has been going on a long time, and that's why I mentioned this article on Consortium News website today, because it puts this in the perspective. I think there's also a map on their website, if I'm not mistaken, that shows how NATO has been growing since the late 80s, when James Baker and many other U.S. officials promised Russia that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. At the time that the wall came down, Germany was united and joined NATO, and the promise was made, don't worry, NATO will not expand 1 inch to the east. And the map shows how it's been expanding and has really been encroaching on Russia. So what you're saying, Russiagate, did Russiagate lay the groundwork? Absolutely. It really just restoked the furnaces again on this, and has been really a revival of the Cold War, complete with the McCarthyism that goes with it, and the effort to demonize political opposition and put us into, kangaroo courts, especially in the media. So yeah, totally. And this is not new. The weapons industry, they also have a very good article addressing how it is that NATO, became a major priority. And, guess who? Surprise, surprise, it's Raytheon and the usual war profiteers who were putting enormous amounts of money, and they were just salivating when Russia annexed Crimea, which is a complicated story, but the weapons industry was overjoyed because now they could really use that to go whole hog. And remember, we've spent $21 trillion, according to the Brown University's Cost of War project. We've spent about 21 trillion over the last 2 decades, and almost half of that, if you look at the actual Pentagon funding, about half of it goes to the war profiteers. It goes to the Raytheons, et cetera, for their contracts. So this is a complete boondoggle for them. And unfortunately, it kills millions of people. It causes failed states and mass refugee migrations and continuing terrorist threats. The disaster of Afghanistan is being repeated over and over again. Many of us saw this in the disaster of Vietnam. This is nothing new. This is U.S. foreign policy. Not to say that the U.S. is the only bad guy out there. We need international law. We badly need international law. We should not be in the business of dismantling it, which has been kind of a major priority, certainly since the Reagan years, if not before. And that continues, under the Biden administration, not in as flagrant ways as Trump, but look what he's doing. I mean, It's god awful. And he's actually posing more, perhaps the biggest, nuclear threat, the biggest threat of an accidental triggering of Third World War that maybe we've seen in our lifetimes.
Oh yeah, I mean it's, and I like I say, like there's no, I mean I say that on this show a lot too. It's like, look, there's no we have been taught that the world is a comic book, and it isn't. Sometimes there's not a good guy and a bad guy. There's just bad guys. But we're being the world's bully here, the United States, of which I am a resident of. So that's what I'm going to talk about the most anyway. They are the world's bully. And when you see other countries following the United States when it comes to aggression around the world, it's like the kindergarten classroom where everybody follows the kid who's eating paste. And it's like, don't do that. Don't follow that kid. Don't follow the United States. And then you see, Germany wants a diplomatic solution. Russia doesn't want to invade. Ukraine does. I mean, it's just, and it's one of those things. If we have a World War III, we're not going to have a World War IV. I mean,
yeah.
It's like,
right.
So,
Right.
What are your predictions for the midterms?
Oh man, it doesn't look good. I mean,
You're not
it doesn't look
stoked?
good. I am stoked about Matthew Ho. And I'm stoked about people discovering that we could have a breakthrough moment here. And we've kind of got a candidate with demonstrated courage and integrity who just has done the right stuff all along, as far back as, I mean, he did go to war 3 times, and he admits that was a horrible mistake. But he went out of, good reasons. He was ill-informed, like so much of the American public, but he had the courage to actually do a 180 and is now a very powerful proponent in the opposite direction. And, he's got the rest of the agenda down as well. He's not just a one-track candidate. He's really got the people, planet, and peace over profit thing down in the tradition of Green Party candidates. He's wonderful. So I'm very excited about that. But the fact that the Democratic Party is now headed by Jamie, whatever his last name is, the former lobbyist from South Carolina, Harrison. Yeah. This doesn't look good, because he was the kind of the prototype of the new Democratic candidate, the lobbyist, the guy who could raise oodles of money, who ran on oodles of money, but who had a very, milquetoast campaign where he would not raise important issues, would not take any real progressive stands on anything, so it's a disaster. And unfortunately for the Democrats, they don't have Greens that they can blame this on right now. So, who knows what their next excuse will be. They might. Right. That's true. That is true. Yes, I know. And some people were still blaming me for their losses in 2020. Oh, I know. I got it for abortion.
When you built that wall in Wisconsin, how long did it stay up? When you single-handedly stopped Hillary Clinton from going in Wisconsin, did you leave your wall up, or what did you do there?
That's right. Yes.
You're very powerful. You stopped. How much did she spend? Like, it was almost how much? Yeah, it's not important, but she out Trump even too. But somehow you stopped her in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, which is ridiculous, and to presume that Green votes would have gone to the Democrats is also like, clueless, absolutely clueless. It's not supported by real world experience and not by the data either. So, I mean, it was really grasping at straws, and they're still grasping at the same old straws, and they're still talking about running Hillary Clinton again because they systematically suppress their progressive candidates. So, yeah, and I think we're going to see them losing their little bit of margin that they had in 2020, and their little bit of margin in the Senate, and their bigger margin in the House. I think it's not looking good for the Democrats. Who knows what will happen between now and then? I don't know, but I think we need to put our feet down, and we need to build a party that actually is working for the people and that is not bought and paid for by the biggest spenders out there. And I think, we need to tune out the propaganda of the Democrats for why they don't, why all of their competitors are basically, immoral villains. and, actually look at the candidates for who they are and vote based on but based on their track record, not just on what they say, but on what they do. And like, surprise, surprise, is anybody surprised at how Biden turned out? That he has not fulfilled his campaign promises for even like the $2,000 checks
he
for
couldn't even manage that one.
a public option for a pharmaceutical thing. I mean, they totally threw away the store in the Build Back Better bill by giving it away. I mean, they didn't even fight. They severed the connection. The one little bit of leverage they had around the infrastructure bill, they just threw it out. So now they've lost everything, including
they totally did it.
The child tax credit. And
it was already a compromise of a compromise of a compromise of a compromise, and they still decoupled it. And we're like, oh, this will be fine. No, it won't be. Like this is. They are the Washington Generals of politics. They are like, their first priority is not winning. It is painfully apparent. Their first priority is, let's just keep the donors happy. And if we can beat a Republican or two every now and again, just so it doesn't look too ridiculous, that's good. But if not all the time, no big deal. The gravy train keeps a rolling. And then there's no pressure on us to actually do anything. We have our ultimate excuse. When we can't blame the Jill Steins of the world, we have our excuse as long as the Republicans are holding power. It's just one party. Wall Street runs it, and it is just a scam. And I know I'm really preaching to the choir big time right now, but it doesn't get any easier to digest.
Exactly. And I think it's really important for people to recognize an abusive relationship when they're in one, and this is a politically abusive relationship, and you keep getting called back into it with this pretense that it's going to be different going forward. It's not. And fundamentally, the game has to be changed. It's important to stop waiting for Godot, stop waiting for the Democrats to reform themselves. They're not going to, and we're wasting precious time. And I do want to mention, aside from the crushing inequality of our current economy, and kudos to the labor organizers who are rising up, and working people who are fighting their way forward and organizing and striking. This is exemplary, and we need that really strong social movement, because politics alone can't do it. It's got to be the social movement on the ground, and it needs expression in a political movement as well. But it's really important to just recognize, not only is the economy crumbling, and it keeps getting worse. We just saw data the other day that the 10 richest men worldwide were making $1 billion a day last year collectively. $1 billion a day is what they were making, while the ranks of poverty were increased by like 130 million, and like 95% of at least Americans, maybe around the world, saw real declines in their income, while the billionaires are making billions a day. It's just staggering. And they've made something like $5 trillion totally. I mean, This is not getting better, folks, in spite of the lip service that you're hearing from both parties, but in particular from the Democrats, who are pretending to be on your side.
The jobs are there. We got more jobs. Everyone. Yeah. Did you see how all these jobs, these jobs that don't pay living wages, we got all these jobs. I mean, it's so ridiculous, the claims they make. And then you look around you and you see the society. And it is crumbling. We are an empire, and we have all the makings of one. Endless war abroad that makes a few people very rich, exploiting the environment again to make a few people very rich, while everyone at home continues to suffer and accept a declining quality of life. I mean, I'm in my 30s. The type of life I had as a child doesn't really exist anymore, and that's just my gen. I'm millennial. I'm not even Gen X. So there's only been a few since me. The life I had isn't really a thing anymore. I had a middle class life. That's not really a thing anymore. It's You're either working poor or rich. That's it. And it's I mean, that's mind blowing.
It is absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh no, I mean,
Keep going. Yeah.
I just, I mean, it is. My wife and I are undecided on if we want children or not. We don't know. But the one thing we are decided on, if we do, we're gonna have to move unless things change because I'm not okay with the quality of life they'd be able to have in this country. I'd say we'd be better off moving away from all of our loved ones, away from their we would be better off moving away from that, which would break my heart. But that kid would be better off in a different country. It really sucks that I feel that way about the only country I've ever called home. It really sucks, but it's justified.
I totally sympathize with that. And, what you're expressing, I think, is what we're actually seeing, that young people are not having families. They are not having kids. They are not able to buy homes. The walls are closing in. And writing has been on the wall here for quite some time. And it's not only that the economic survival is tanking, but it's our physical survival too, our access to water and food in relation to the climate. It's sort of the total implosion of our environment. Focusing on climate because it's especially dramatic, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that we are witnessing an accelerating state of emergency right now. And I just want to point out two facts, which to me are absolutely game changers. And one of them is, you can look all over the world, and see how it's end game on the climate right now for millions of people. But what many Americans don't realize is that it's end game for us too. Poor nations may be hit first and worst, but we are not far behind. And if you look at the Colorado River, which has been drying up over several decades and is now reaching critical levels, the Colorado River feeds California agriculture, which supplies half of fruits and vegetables for the US. So the Colorado River in the next 10, 20 years could go critical, and we could begin to see really drastic food shortages in the US that will hit all of us. Another one that will be much harder to do a workaround for, and I'm not sure you can actually do a workaround around the drying up of California's agriculture. But another one which is even more daunting is that the ice sheet known as the Thwaites Glacier, also known as the Doomsday Glacier, which is an Antarctic ice sheet in West Antarctica. That's like down below the South Pole, so-called. That ice sheet contains about 2 feet of sea level rise, and it's about to lose the break that stops it from flowing into the ocean. And people were shocked. Scientists and observers were shocked to learn that the shelf, which acts as a break, so here's the glacier, it's kind of flowing from the rocky part of Antarctica down into the water. It would flow like that, except that there's a break on it right now, and that's this little shelf of ice right here that prevents this glacier from flowing down. Well, this little shelf of ice right here that's holding back 2 feet of water is going to go in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe sooner. And when it goes, you've got 2 feet of water. And whether sea level will rise 2 feet in the next decade or two, or by the end of the century, they're not sure, but it's near term. It's very near term, and it could easily be a decade. This is what Jim Hansen predicted decades ago, that we were going to see potentially massive breakup of ice sheets. And they are breaking up massively right now. If you go on YouTube and you just you Google videos of massive ice sheets breaking up, you will see it's happening all over, including right there. And you could see this happen faster than our worst nightmares. So we could be confronted with a 2-foot sea level rise. And guess what? That glacier itself is then the backstop against 10 more feet in that particular region of Antarctica. So we're looking at potentially a 10-foot sea level rise, end of decade, who knows? But 2 feet alone would be ruinous for hundreds of millions of people. You won't be able to live there anymore. And storm surges are going to be like way worse than what they are now. I mean, many communities are already flooding, but this is going to make it quite unlivable. There are something like 130,000 people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, whose homes will become unlivable. And that could be soon, needless to mention Florida and Manhattan and Bangladesh and population centers all around the world. So
I live right near the LA Harbor. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of wondering, I'm like, man, I'm hoping my neighborhood's around for a long time, but who knows?
Exactly. And the point here is that we don't have time to wait around. If you are in that abusive relationship with the parties of oligarchy right now, it's a good time to get out of that abusive relationship while we can still salvage our future. And ranked choice voting should be front and center, along with, proportional representation. There are a variety of things that get rid of that so-called spoiler effect, which is used. It's kept in place. It's maintained by the powers that be in order to stifle their competition. So you can't let that stop you. That is a fixable problem. That is the most fixable of the much more serious existential problems that are barreling down on us right now. We need to get out of this abusive relationship and get into the business of actually protecting our future. And that is doable. We need an emergency wartime scale Green New Deal. We need to call an immediate ceasefire in our military predatory misadventures, immediate ceasefire, and move that money globally into the real war against climate change and the war for our global survival. This is doable, and take down the nukes while we're at it. And by the way, there are a whole bunch of nuclear power plants along the coasts that are very much at risk for going Fukushima when the sea level rises. So we don't have time to make excuses and to keep looking for window dressing on an impossible and corrupt system. We really do need a fundamental system change. We need to get the big money out. We need to put the people back in. We need people-powered politics. And I urge you to be a part of this.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, really, it's like y'all call it the eco-socialist Green New Deal. And that's literally what we need. Like we need to have a society that is conducted on meeting human needs while being stewards to the earth. That's literally eco-socialism. That's what I just described. There's a word for it. That's what it is. You've been very generous with your time, and I thank you for that. I have one more question for you, and I'm going to put you in the hot seat. I got to warn you now. I'm going to put you in the hot seat a little bit. So in April, I am going to be playing Boston, Mass, and people have requested this. Every now and again, when I close out the show, I will play a protest tune or two that I have rewritten and made it, like a funny updated version of a classic protest tune. Is there a chance that perhaps in Boston, Mass, if you can make the show, you would join me for a tune at the end?
Sure, that would be fun.
All right, deal.
Oh, yeah.
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, keep me posted.
All right,
Yeah.
April 24th. Mark your calendar. You got it.
April 24th. Okay,
All
great.
right. All right, good. Anything else? What would you like to plug in closing? Any websites you want to point to?
Yes. Last thing. So join the fight for independent politics, for our voices, for public funding of elections, access to the ballot for, beyond the parties of war on Wall Street. Go to jillstein.net to be a part of that fight. But I also want to point you to a website which is just going up right now. This is kind of a fledgling thing, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of commitment to making it happen. And that is, we need to turn Earth Day into a day not just for the Earth, but for people, planet, and peace over profit. And so there's an effort to make this an anti-war day, as well as a day to stop climate change and move the Green New Deal. It's a day to stop war, and it's a day for working people. So we're calling for an Earth Day strike. An Earth Day strike. Now, what's a one-day strike? It's not really a strike, and we're not telling you if you are working and would be at risk. We don't want to encourage you to stop work unless it is a part of a collective process. But there are already many workers who are not working, and it's a day to celebrate their struggle. And for those who can spend the day in sympathy, we're urging people to do that. Anyhow, go to Earth Day Strike 2022.org. That's
All right.
Earth Day Strike 2022. It's just getting organized now. We're hoping that lots of people will do their actions, and whether it is a picket, going to your local Starbucks to support the workers who are fighting there, to organize a union, whether it is to go to the banks that are funding the war and the fossil fuel disaster. We're going to be lifting up those struggles, and there will be a campaign going on around then, as well as a whole series of actions between Earth Day to May Day, drawing the connection, literally, between the struggle for the planet and the struggle for the people on it. So this is a jumping off point. You can get involved. We'll have a map where you can put your local protest, rally, sit-in, whatever you're doing, demonstration, teach-in, etc. You can put it on the map, and we can just see if we align our struggles and align our calendars, we can be an unstoppable force. And this is a place to learn from the workers who are striking how to strike, because social change at the end of the day, if it's transformative, it usually needs a general strike. How are we going to do a general strike if we haven't learned how to do a general strike? So this is a day to think about the big picture and to step up to the plate and take responsibility for our future, to take it back from those who are throwing it over the cliff and profiteering in doing that. It's time to say no and to start really turning the tide. Right now, join us at Earth Day Strike 2022.org. So
Right.
there you go.
That sounds awesome. Hey, General Strike is music to my ears. I'm a big fan. So yeah. So
and
thank you.
And go to Matthew Ho. Matthew Ho again. Matthew Ho
I'll have
for
to
Senate.
have him on the show. I'll have to have him on the show.
That'd be
I
great.
don't do a ton with electoralism these days, but I do have my moments where I dive into it some, and that would be one of the moments I would want to dive into. So I'll have to have him on this show. Absolutely.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. Everybody check it out, jillstein.net and Earth Day 2022, Earth Day Strike 2022.org. I'll have to check that out myself. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome.
So, all right. Thank you very much, Jill.
Great.
Dr. Stein, wonderful checking in with you. And we'll have to check in again soon. And I hope to see you in April. I'm really excited now.
I'll send you some
lyrics. Oh, perfect. Yes. I'm stoked.
Right, great.
All right.
Sounds great.
Well. Peace.
Awesome. Take care. Okay, bye.
You too. Peace. Jill Stein, everybody. Jill Stein. Guys, before we sign out, let me hit the chat here real quick. Ray, what's up, buddy? I hope all is well and you are safe and healthy and well. Say, Ron, proud to have marched with Jill against the Pentagon in 2018. That's awesome, Ray. Good for you. That is fantastic. Omar, what's up? Thank you for the Super Chat contribution. People to fate and lazy. People are too lazy to research, and they just take what the corporate media spews instead of worrying about immigrants. And at the same time, they're killing millions of people around the world. I hear you. I mean, people, they just kind of take what the corporate media spews, and they don't really ask the critical questions, and they get distracted by, I think as Jill Stein put it, window dressing. Christine, what's up? Thank you very much for the heart. Thank you so much for that. You help keep the show on the air. Thank you, Ray Foley. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Christine. Tour dates, I got them. I'm going to be at Flappers Comedy Club on February 10th. That's coming up. Should have a lot of cool special guests there. Romplicone.com for tickets. In April, I'm going out east. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Burlington, Portland, Maine, Boston, Massachusetts. Rumor has it there might be a special guest at that Boston show. And then New York City. Grab your tickets now. Romplicone.com for all the East Coast Canadian dates coming up in April. Chris Moen's going to be opening those shows. Lauren Ashcraft is going to be at Pittsburgh and New York. Oh, and she's coming back to the show soon too, by the way. Lauren will be back soon. She was a regular headlines goer through with me, but then she got a day job. She has left said day job since. So anyway, she'll be coming back to the show soon. So look forward to Lauren coming back. And guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And check it out, jillstein.net and earthdaystrike2022.org, romflacone.com for all those tour dates and tickets. And in the meantime, you know the drill. Oh, headline show is going to be Wednesday this week instead of Thursday. I have a conflict on Thursday, so Wednesday instead of Thursday. That's this week only. So I'll see you then. And in the meantime, you know the drill. Lucy, she says meow, and I say peace, love, and a general strike. See y'all Wednesday.